Hello, welcome to the second podcast for the International Sustainability Standards Board. This is Sue Lloyd, Vice Chair of the Board, and I'm joined today by Emmanuel Faber, the Chair of the ISSB. So it's the end of our second board week here in Frankfurt. Last time we spoke to you, we had just come out of our very first board meeting, where we had the benefit of hearing from the staff about the feedback we've been receiving in the outreach on our exposure drafts. The general requirements exposure draft S1 and the climate exposure draft S2. This week, we've had the opportunity to actually do a deep dive into the feedback from the comment letters. Our staff have worked really hard since the end of July to get to us a detailed analysis of the comment letters, and so that was what we were discussing this week. And it was also a really exciting week for us as well, because it was the first time that we actually voted as a board. So we got to put our hands up twice, and the staff were really excited that our first two decisions were unanimous. We're not sure they should get used to that, but that was an exciting moment that we all enjoyed. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand over to Emmanuel for him to give us, his thoughts on this week's board meeting.
Thank you, Sue, and welcome everyone to our podcast. Indeed, it's been a pretty eventful summer, I would say, since we last spoke to you out of our Frankfurt meeting in July as a board. I think I'd like to maybe briefly, remind everyone that one of the important moments was in August, when we were able to announced the appointment of a complete and finalized board of 14 members, in addition to the 10 or the 9, sorry, that attended in July. We've announced in addition our Japanese member, Hiro Komoshi, two ladies from European countries who are going to be based here in Frankfurt. Veronika Puncheva joining as the former Chief Sustainability Officer of Metro AG, and Jenny Bofinger, who is currently the Chief Sustainability Officer of Siemens. Veronika is from Bulgaria, Jenny is from Germany. And we also finalized the team of ISSB by appointing a second vice chair next to Sue, in the person of Jindong Hua, who is a Chinese national, who so far has been the vice president and treasurer of the World Bank. And we elevated his role to the function of vice chair, because he will be specifically in charge of an extremely important part of our work, and I'm sure Sue will elaborate further on this when we speak about proportionality, which is we are here to build a truly inclusive, comprehensive global baseline. And so reaching out to smaller entities, to emerging economies and markets is of the essence of that truly global baseline. In particular, when you think about climate, it's quite clear that this is a global topic that cannot be addressed by any specific jurisdictions, investor or company, and therefore that needs and requires this true inclusion. So Gino will be in particular responsible of that in his ability as co-vice chair. I would add to this that the other, of course, very eventful part of the summer has been the incredible work of our staff, and I would like to thank Sue for leading that work with all our staff this summer. We received by the end of July more than 1,300 letters of comments, some of them extremely detailed, and we are thankful to all of you on this podcast and beyond that took the time and the effort of writing to us what your comments were. We also built on all the outreach events, more finally than close to 500 of them that were conducted by our teams, reaching out to 30,000 people across the period of the consultation. Now, thank you for doing that, and I have to say that hopefully your efforts were not unnoticed. Our staff spent just on the analysis and the coding of these 1,300 letters more than 1,000 hours in a matter of a few weeks and 20 persons, just to produce a super high quality review, well organized, that I think, and I would personally comment as being an extremely solid basis for discussions at this board meeting, with the board papers being posted 10 days ahead of that. They've been public, and I hope that, and we certainly got some already good feedback on the quality of this analysis. So it allowed us indeed to both elaborate as a board and clarify with the staff during these few days of board meetings here the rich feedback, the subtleties of this feedback, some of the mixed feedback that we received. And we certainly felt at the end of these clarification sessions much better equipped in then discussing what was next on the agenda, which is the strategy for redeliberation on these topics. I'll come back to that maybe at the end again, because of course we have this sense, as illustrated in the board papers, of both the momentum in which the market is reiterating their interest and ask for us to be working on what we do, and the adoption of our standards, and also the ask for being timely in that, and the compliment actually for ISSB's both thorough work, but really timely in terms of the delivery, and delivering probably beyond expectations to a certain degree, but that consciousness of timing is very important in our role of building this global baseline at a moment where many jurisdictions are moving in the same direction of establishing standards, and therefore the fact that they become a common language is fundamental to our remit. So that strategy for redeliberation is a big deal for us, to make sure that we prioritize the right decisions at the right moment in the next 3 months. With that, I will stop and probably suggest if you could talk to us a little bit about the technical content of our discussions, please.
Sure, Emmanuel. So I think quite tellingly, one of the first things that the first decisions that we made at the board this month were on this issue of proportionality or scalability. So one of the very consistent messages that we got, both in the outreach that we did, but also through the comment letters, was really strong support for the global baseline, but really a very high level of emphasis from stakeholders about the importance of making sure that this is an accessible set of requirements for different types of entities right across the world. And I think really reflecting how seriously we're taking that, it was no sort of surprise that the first cab off the rank in terms of what we would discuss was what we might do from a standard setting perspective to really support this. So in addition to what I'm about to talk about, of course, we're also thinking about capacity building. We're also thinking about working with jurisdictions to make sure that there's a sensible time frame for application of the standards and things like that. But what we were talking about in this board meeting was what tools could we use in the actual standards that might help those who have capacity constraints. And we decided on a couple of tools that we will consider when we get to particular standard setting issues during the redeliberations. In particular, the fact that we would propose that in some cases we would allow simpler disclosures to be required for some entities than for others, making sure in both cases that they're good disclosures for investors, but with some less complexity in some cases. And we also talked about the possibility of perhaps having some disclosures that would be applicable to all entities immediately, so maybe more qualitative ones, and perhaps having more complicated disclosures available for all entities at a later date. So bringing smaller entities and emerging markets in maybe at later dates. So we were talking about this toolkit. And one really important discussion that we had about this toolkit was the fact that as an aspiration, we don't want to lose sight of the idea of a global baseline that is comparable as the ultimate goal. So a lot of the discussion was about how we could use tools to allow more time for some entities to get into the system and to really get up to the full package of disclosures, but doing that in a manner which really respects the need for comparability for investors and an aspirational, high quality global baseline for everybody as the ultimate goal. So that was a really important discussion, and I think an interesting one for people to listen to if you want to go back and listen to the tape. The second thing where we made decisions was in the plan for the redeliberations. So we actually gave the staff the sort of directions on what should come back for redeliberations, which is, a very quick set of decisions, given that the comment letter deadline finished only at the end of July. And that's because we thought by making the decisions now, we can be really organised and efficient in our redeliberations to really get this done as quickly as we can, while being respectful of the feedback that we've got and making sure that we have a high quality product at the end. So if I were to comment on the types of decisions that come back, I think I'd probably group them in a couple of ways. One is that we will confirm and look at clarifying and working on some of the foundational aspects of S1, the general requirements document. So for example, how we describe the scope, what is encapsulated within sustainability related financial information, how we articulate our investor focus. Some of these more fundamental issues will be an important stream of work. And then once we get to climate, we'll look at some very specific topics, probably no surprises here, confirming how we'll deal with carbon offsets, looking at what we do with GHG emissions measurement, and also, really importantly, looking at what we do with the industry-based requirements in Appendix B to the climate documents, where there was strong and different views from our stakeholders. So that will be a really important discussion, but I think the one thing I will say on the industry-based requirements in Appendix B is that we did get strong support for industry-specific disclosures. So it's really a question of the status of Appendix B and how specific we are with which particular industry-specific disclosures would be required, rather than whether we would have industry-specific requirements. But as Emmanuel said, the papers on our website will also be issuing a summary of the decisions, and so that gives the specific set of topics that are going to be coming back to the board for the redeliberations.
Thank you. So maybe as a follow-up, it looks to me that we also had a number of discussions of clarification, at least on the around scope 3, its exact definition and the value chain. Can you maybe would you expect, I'd say, some redeliberation about this in October?
Yeah. Yes, well, we expect to starting again in October to do a bit more of a deep dive into the GHG emission side of things in particular. Probably looking at, whether we ask for scope 3 or not, was at least starting those discussions. And as Emmanuel said, really starting to look at some of the practical questions that we got back on how you deal with some of the measurement issues around greenhouse gas emissions. Some really important questions from some jurisdictions on whether the GHG protocol should be the only measurement methodology referred to, because it's not used exclusively around the world. And a lot of people have asked us to really give a little bit more thought and clarity about both how you think about what to capture in the measurement in your value chain for GHG emissions, and also how to deal with some of the practical data availability type challenges. So there'll be quite a few different aspects of that sort of emissions disclosure stream of work.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Sue. And one thing I would add, because you were alluding to this this fact that jurisdictions have highlighted the diversity of standards, protocol available, etc. I'd just like to remind all of us here around this podcast that we actually have also a formal mechanism that allows us to have a dialogue with a few of the growing number of jurisdictions that become more and more actively engaged in the space of sustainability standard setting. As you may remember, we've established a jurisdictional working group in May of this year with 5 jurisdictions that are currently very actively engaged in our topics, and that is the US, the EU, Japan, China, and the UK, with IOSCO as an observer in those meetings. And we've held those meetings on a very regular basis every month since the month of May. The last meeting was just this week on Monday before our first board session, and I have to say that I would really like to be to express my gratitude on behalf of ISSB for the time and effort spent by our colleagues from those jurisdictions, because it's a tremendous source of insight, as they've been able, as anybody else, to also look at our board papers, and we could receive direct feedback from them after only a few days after those papers became public about those and the needs for clarification and some other comments. And as of course, and as I shared to start this podcast, our mission is to build a common language that will encompass those jurisdictions and many more. It is critical for us to also listen directly from those. So we will continue our work with the jurisdictional working group in the next several months to inform our board deliberations on the basis of the board papers that we publish a few days before board meetings. And I would also like to say that we will increasingly rely on the constituencies that we have set around ISSB to inform our work. And I would like to name 2 of them very importantly. The first is our investor advisory group that plays and that will and should play a major role in guiding our work. That group is inheriting the very successful and numerous group of the VRF Foundation and the SASB standards, which we will expand and would seek to continue the dialogue with them. Ultimately, they are the users and the end users of our standards, and it's critical that we continue our dialogue with them. And the second I would mention is the Sustainability Consultative Committee that we have established. The first meeting took place last week. The second meeting will take place in a very timely manner before our board meeting in October. That committee is made of 5 multilateral organizations that have been at the inception of the creation of ISSB, and a number of expert additional members that we have appointed. Our first discussion was really an introductory discussion, but the next discussion is meant to also inform our agenda consultation and follow-on discussions based on where we are with our standards. As you all know, we have been tasked to start with climate, but not to stay only with climate. And for some part of the feedback that we've received and that we continue to receive, there's some sort of urgency on some of, in particular, the climate-related topics. So the Sustainability Consultative Committee will be able to bring their input to our discussion in October, when we start discussing about the next part of our agenda beyond climate. So, any more comment, please?
I might move on to something else that was covered this week in our board meeting that we haven't mentioned yet, which is moving slightly from our deliberations on our own work and thinking about the connectivity with the IASB, which is obviously a very important part of our role being within the foundation, and with many being very interested and hoping that we remember about the connectivity of the work between the two boards. And so having an update from the chair of the IASB, Andreas Barkow, to make sure that we as a board were aware of the priority projects and what they're working on, so that we have a level of awareness of their work and the potential points of connectivity in our work stream is a really important session for the board as well. So really great to start that dialogue in our meetings with our sister board. And then I think I just look forward to our October meeting. So our October meeting will be held in Montreal, our first board meeting in Montreal, which will be exciting. And we're looking forward there to really quite a big week, I think, with a lot of papers coming, moving forward, both a combination, I hope, of decision making, but also scene setting, deep diving on particular aspects of our redeliberations. And as Emmanuel just alluded to, again, talking about the future with a forward look on the future work on the consultation on the future agenda. So for those of you interested in our work, look out for the Montreal Board Week. I think it'll be quite a big week for us, so something to really look out for.
Thank you. And I think with that, we'll close. In Montreal, we'll be 12. We were 10 this week. And so 2 additional members who've been appointed would have joined by then. And that's really great because, as Sue just said, we will have a very full agenda of deliberation. So stay tuned. Thank you for your attention, and we'll speak to you again in October from Montreal.
For the latest developments from either the International Sustainability Standards Board or the International Accounting Standards Board, make sure to subscribe on the IFRS Foundation website, www.ifrs.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast player.